You ever heard of this guy, Brandon Lake? Yeah, this guy. My goodness, over the last few years, he has been on quite a run, writing, contributing to, and singing on some of the most popular worship songs. And you know what? The keys parts on many of Brandon Lake's songs are absolutely killer. So we want to dive into how you can sound like Brandon Lake from the keyboard. Let's check it out. By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of not just what parts to play on the keyboard, but when to play them and with what sounds. All inspired by one of the best out there doing it right now, Brandon Lake. Okay, so I have to do a bit of a disclaimer, or at least a preface here. We've done videos like this before, Sound Like Phil Wickham, Sound Like Bethel, Sound Like Elevation, and those videos were fun and a little bit easier to prepare than this one, because I feel like each of the bands I just mentioned has a very distinct sound. But Brandon Lake, it's a little bit trickier. Why? Because he's the king of the collab. He's written and released music with Bethel, Elevation, Maverick City, Chris Tomlin, Matt Redman, Kirk Franklin, Brooke Ligertwood, Chris Tomlin, Ben Hastings, and tons more. It took a bit more thinking to figure out how to frame what it means to sound like Brandon Lake. It's not just, oh, lots of synth parts, or oh, lots of ambient pads. But I think it's going to be helpful to you, and we can learn a lot from Brandon Lake's collaborative approach to so much of his career so far. If we look at his credits on CCLI, it is quite a list. And if we flip over to the CCLI Top 100, we can see that he's in the credits for many of the most popular worship songs right now. In fact, we can see several songs he's contributed to in the top 20. Now, since many of these songs have been collabs, there's a lot that separates them because that collaboration often borrows from the stylistic bent of the collaborators. So when he's playing with Bethel, it sounds kind of Bethel-y. When he's playing with Maverick City, it sounds Maverick-y, Elevation-y, Phil Wickham-y, I don't know. You get what I mean. But there are common sort of through lines that show up across Brandon Lake's body of work. Most of the time his songs are dynamic, anthemic. They get big. There's a huge difference between where they start and where they go in terms of the energy, the intensity, and yes, the keyboard parts. I do also often hear a certain earnestness, a directness, not just in the lyrics, but in the musicality, the arrangement around some of his songs, maybe kind of bordering on essentialism. If you don't know what I mean, it's hard to really put an objective stamp on it. It's just like what needs to be there is there. And sometimes there's not a lot other than that when it comes to the way his songs get arranged out. That doesn't mean they don't get huge. It just means they're put together really intentionally. His parts, his arrangements are always defined by, at least in part, the people that he is collaborating with across some of his most popular songs. I'll explain what I mean. This is all gonna come together and make more sense. We're gonna do this by comparing two of his most popular songs. One was a collab, Graves into Gardens, and the other, Gratitude, he's released a solo version of, and then there's also a live version of that as well. We're gonna focus on the live version because it builds up a lot more. The reason that I wanted to use these two songs as an example is because they are really similar in a couple of ways. Graves into Gardens and Gratitude are both songs in 6/8, and they're even in the same key of B. So we'll stick there for our discussion today. But honestly, when you listen to these songs, they couldn't feel more different. Graves into Gardens swings, and Gratitude is played a bit more straight. And so this is sort of the initial bit of context we need to start analyzing these two songs and how it informs the sound of Brandon Lake. So I have 3 tips for you that I've kind of extracted from studying these two songs. I want to hear what you think in the comments as well as I compare these two. What jumps out to you that you think we can apply when we're talking about being inspired by Brandon Lake's work? Tip number 1, think about the feel. I wanted to strip back anything that's fancy, no big sounds or anything. I've just got this very quiet felt piano. And it's noisy, it's pretty. And I wanted it to be pretty because it's expressive, but I didn't want a bunch of layers of complexity getting in the way of this first point when we're thinking about the feel. Because we have these two songs. Like I said, Graves into Gardens swings, and Gratitude is played more straight. They're both in 6/8, they're both in the key of B, but they feel super different. Let's start with Graves into Gardens. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than than you. There's nothing is better than you. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, kick on the 1, snare on the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when you count it in 6 like that, you could think, well, that's it, it's in 6. And Gratitude is also in 6. So people might end up feeling like, all right, these are both songs in 6, so they feel relatively the same. It's only a difference of tempo. But it's what's happening in between, the subdivision of those eighth notes, that is what gives the song its feel. And this is swung, so it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Right? Sorry for beatboxing. I said I'd never do that on this channel. But you're swinging it, right? So it's those little moments, like where you're swinging, you're playing within that subdivision. And the melody's doing this as well, the lyrics. And that really feels strong as you get to the bridge. Right? So that's Graves into Gardens, and that feel is so important to lock into. If you play it or sing it straight, it's not the same song. Trust me, you do not want to do that. I don't know that I even can do it, so I'm not going to try. I've already embarrassed myself enough by beatboxing during this video. Okay, now let's contrast Graves into Gardens, swung 6/8, to Gratitude, which is also 6/8, but played a lot straighter. Let's see if I can make this context switch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On my heart singing hallelujah, hallelujah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's still kick 1, snare 4. 1, 2, 3. But it's not going. It's just 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So if you're playing it on the hats, it'd be still a little bit of feel, but not like a shuffle, right? Should have done that. Why did I beatbox? I should have just done that. So there's a huge difference in feel, and that really defines it. So much of Brandon Lake's music being collaborative means that the feel of whoever he's collaborating with is super duper important. Now you might feel like, well, this isn't relevant to me. I'm not collaborating with Elevation. I'm not collaborating with Maverick or Bethel. But every single time you step on that stage as a volunteer or a staff member in your band, you are collaborating with the people in your band. So if you're ignoring that context of, Steve who's on guitar this week and what Steve likes to do, or the skills and abilities of your drummer, if you're not viewing those band members as collaborators, if you're just playing your parts because those are the parts on the original recording and I took time to practice and they didn't take time to practice, then you're actually missing out on the real reason that you're there, to be a part of the team, to contribute to the overall bigger picture of what you're trying to do. So I love that Brandon Lake has so many interesting collaborators and so many different feels, right? There's a lot that you can learn from his approach to collaboration. And the feel is really what collaboration is about when it comes to this musical sense. Like, what are people doing? What are they bringing? How does it feel? Are we playing it super straight? Is it swung? All of that's really interesting to me, and I think that's the main thing that jumped out to me right away when I started to dig into his approach to his music. Tip number 2, think about the vibe. We're gonna stick with these 2 songs, and we've already sort of started to lay the groundwork for this. There's a big difference in how these songs feel, and you might be thinking, Dave, vibe and feel are kind of the same thing. And yeah, I had to pick words to describe these things, and I'll try and explain what I mean, what the difference is. For this video, I'm thinking that feel is actually about timing, right? The actual way that we're chopping up time, the way that we're playing within the tempo and time signature that we are in. And that varies a lot across Brandon Lake's discography, especially the collaborative stuff. When I'm thinking about vibe, it's more about the atmosphere of the song, stylistically. What genres are we playing within? Graves into Gardens almost plays like this sort of alternative southern rocky sort of thing, and Gratitude sounds like Coldplay to me, especially when they hit that minor 5 chord. I mean, it's straight out of the X and Y era. Coldplay fans represent in the comments. But there's a huge difference in the vibe between these two songs, even though they share the same time signature and they share the same key. Now, of course, they're swung differently, right? The subdivisions are handled differently, and that's the feel. The vibe is the arrangement, the musicality, the sounds, the orchestration, how this all comes together. And as a keyboard player and a sound designer, I can think about how I can impart vibe with the sounds that I choose to use. And I prepared a couple of patches to show you what I mean. So here's Graves into Gardens. And then I built this to build up. So check out what happens in the right hand. So I've got big synth layers, I have a bright pad sound, I have a big sort of southerny organ with a lot of ambience, because again, it's modern worship music, so it's not just southern rock, it's like southern rock through a big reverb, right? And then I also have a studio grand piano, which just, for this purpose, this voicing has a nice bit of compression and sort of a tight hall reverb on it, so it sounds big but controlled. And to me, this is that sort of, it's pretty tight, like I can comp, which just means play rhythmically. And this is just reinforcing that swing that defines the song. And then as we build, I have this big, ugly, almost, lead sound. Only in the right hand. You can see that purple layer has a layer split here at the B. And you might think, in the context of just the keys parts, wow, this sounds pretty grungy, David, and that's actually true. There's a lot of brightness and a lot of grit. But again, we're thinking southern sort of alternative rock. There is a bit of a bite, an edge on this style, this vibe. And in the context of a full band where you have drummer really playing it out, lots of bass, and the electric guitarist hitting those changes, singers are belting, this is mostly going to fade away, the ugliness of it, and all that's going to be left is the saturation, the brightness of these sounds. So Graves into Gardens gets super massive, and it stays kind of crunchy almost, southern, rocky, kind of dry, but there's this ambience behind it too. It's a really interesting song. That whole era of Elevation is pretty fascinating to me. Some really cool stuff happening around that time. Now let's contrast that with Gratitude. This is what I put together for this one. And then that big final sort of alternate version of the chorus, which is really where it gets super Coldplay-ish. So cool. I'm a sucker for anybody ripping off Coldplay. All I strive to do in my own music is rip off Coldplay in a way that is obvious to me and obvious to no one else. I don't know if Brandon Lake really pulled that off here because it's pretty obviously Coldplay-esque, inspired, unintentional or intentional. I don't really care. It's super cool. I love this moment of the song. So for this song, it's really a huge contrast of vibe compared to Graves. I have this sort of quiet, fragile felt piano. And I have this wispy violin, my favorite string sound in Sunday keys. It's this coming and going, swaying sort of string sound. I have a bit of sub bass. You can hear that there just to thicken everything up. And then this shimmer pad, which happens really slowly. This is actually a taped shimmer pad, so like Mellotron style that we created. Super cool, and has that brightness, that sort of eerie, airy Coldplay vibe. That lets you just sit back on these chords. And then all these layers happen. But you never do. And then we can just build a little bit with our playing. Just start to walk that there. Helpful if I play the right chords. I will eventually. And then as we build, a couple things are happening. I'm going to talk about it so you can see it and notice it as I hit this second snapshot. The brightness is increasing via the mod wheel. The layers are coming up in volume, but there's something really interesting happening here. I'm bringing in a second layered piano. This is also from the mini piano, but it's not the felt articulation. This is an unfelted articulation, so it ends up being like a half upright sound. This is super Coldplay-esque. In the mix of these two sounds, you get brightness and air from the hit, the attack of the felt, and then you get the body and strength of just the pure voicing. So together, those two things sound like this. And on their own, it's interesting, this blend. So it's clearly the same instrument resonating, but a different space. But really where the magic is when you bring this to the mix. So. And we hit that minor 5 chord. And the minor 4 chord. And that shimmer just takes us up, ascending into the sky. Just truly, truly beautiful. And we contrast that with this. Both walls of sound, but entirely different bricks, which I think is super cool. Tip number 3, you've got to think different. So much of Brandon Lake's collaborative work leans directly into whatever the bands he's collaborating with do from a genre sensibility standpoint. So using the ingredients, of course, the musicians of those bands, and then they're kind of coming together in the middle. When you listen to his solo work, there's a little bit less of a we don't have to do anything so we can do anything attitude. I know he's a huge fan of Switchfoot, clearly a big fan of Coldplay. I'd be really curious who else is inspiring him that's outside of just like the contemporary worship or gospel scenes. I think it's super fun to try and get inside the mind of the artist and figure out what else are they listening to that's helping them come up with the ideas that they have. So much of his music, to me, the solo stuff, is defined by this just sort of joyful, exuberant, sometimes even like almost boisterous approach musically. And I think that is sort of unique in the space, that not the joyfulness necessarily, but the strength, almost the bravado, not in a negative way, but just musically, almost a brashness, which I think is pretty cool. And we can do this from the keyboard. We can think a little bit differently about our role if we have the context in which to do it. We can think about adding these sorts of bold or unexpected flavors from the keyboard when the song would welcome it. So let's go back to this Graves into Gardens patch, and I'm going to duplicate it because I want to build an alternate version. I'll put it down here at the bottom, And I'll tell you what I'll do, folks. We'll put a link in the description to a shared setlist file so you can download this shared setlist and open it in the Sunday Keys app for yourself. You can try out these patches. Maybe you'll end up using them. Let's just go to this big moment. Okay, so specifically, I'm thinking about this dystopic lead is kind of a big, bold, loud choice on its own, but in the mix, it's just adding sizzle. And this is an aggressive sound. It's also right within that sort of southern rock, alt rock kind of space that the song is doing. We could do something bold, a little bit unexpected if we took this in a different direction. We could go to the leads category and replace this sound with some other kind of big, bright lead. I've got one in mind. For the sake of time, I want to show you this octave bell stack lead. This is a big, bright synth sound. It's almost pushing back maybe 5-8 years towards like the really synthy stuff that like Hillsong Young and Free was doing, lots of folks started doing. This is like a keys sort of lead sound. It has a tack. And it's more maybe triumphant, definitely more noticeable, and maybe a touch retro. But the rest of everything is still blending in the expected way. So I think it's just about taking a chance to do something maybe just a bit outside of the core space. I'm not replacing every sound in my patch, but replacing one sound to try and just do something different can lead to a lot of inspiration. And if I pulled this out in the mix, I do think it would sort of define that bridge differently. It just says something different genre-wise, a little bit retro, a little bit poppy, and I think that could be something that's really cool. And I like seeing those sorts of flourishes, those sorts of creative decisions, especially across Brandon Lake's solo work. So if you've mostly just listened to the collabs, you should go listen to his solo album because it's got some interesting ideas that I think are pretty inspiring. So we have Graves, Gratitude, and then an alternate version of Graves into Gardens with that creative choice. We will put a link in the description to the shared set list. Just click the link on your iPad or Mac. It will automatically open the Sunday Keys app, and that set list is going to be ready for you to try. Leave a comment and let me know if I missed something about Brandon Lake that you think applies to your keys playing. I'd love to hear from you. And check out the shared set list. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching.